moving full steam ahead on their push for answers surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein case. Today marks a deadline for Epstein's estate to turn over a slew of evidence to the House Oversight Committee, including financial records, NDAs, and that now infamous birthday book that reportedly contains a message from Donald Trump, which he denies. And while President Trump has slammed the new push for answers as a Democratic hoax, Speaker Mike Johnson had a different message. He claimed that Trump, a longtime friend of Epstein, they had a falling out though, that he was actually an FBI informant that tried to take Epstein down, which he later walked back.
Trump called it a hoax yesterday.
What Trump is referring to is the hoax that the Democrats are using to try to attack him. He's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down. The president knows and has great sympathy for the women who have suffered these unspeakable harms. It's detestable to him. He and I have spoken about this as recently as 24 hours ago. What he's talking about is the Democrats who are doing this with impure motives.
Joining us now, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin, MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian, and former federal prosecutor Temadayo Agenga-Williams. He was also senior investigative counsel for the January 6th Select Committee. Julie, lawmakers have asked for a slew of evidence related to the Epstein case. So where do their efforts stand going into this week?
And specifically, we're talking about on the lawmakers on the House Oversight Committee, because I know there are parallel efforts going on with that separate discharge petition to try and force the Department of Justice to release these files. But essentially, what's going to happen today, we expect, according to a source familiar, that the House Oversight Committee will begin to receive redacted versions of certain documents subpoenaed by James Comer, the Republican chair of the committee. You see them there on your screen. Specifically, what they're hoping to see is that so-called birthday book, the one in which, apparently, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, Donald Trump then in 2003 essentially wrote and drew a doodle for Epstein. Democrats on the committee are keeping their eyes peeled to see if that is ultimately included in what is turned over by the estate today, which they expect it to be. Also, phone logs, flight logs, anywhere they could potentially see any connections with who Epstein was in contact with, who his associates were, a bigger breadth than what we already knew over the last 2 decades. And certainly there's a lot more to be seen. Remember, this is going to be redacted. It's going to take time for them to go over this stuff. And certainly for Democrats, at least, there is some skepticism that they might not be able to trust what the state is turning over.
And so, Julie, then there's the group of House staffers from the Oversight Committee that are expected to travel here to New York City to look at documents with Epstein lawyers from the Epstein estate. So is the information they're getting in that visit supposed to be different?
Well, that's going to be the unredacted version, potentially, of some of the documents they're already receiving today, including that birthday book, including the phone calls, the flight logs. And that's where I say Democrats don't necessarily trust the state. They trust the process because of everything we've seen play out, of course, politically over the last couple of months since this really came out into the ether. But that is why a bipartisan group of lawyers on the committee, Republicans and Democrats, are going to travel to New York City later this week, I'm told, to sit down and meet with the lawyers to see redacted versions of these documents to make sure that nothing that they are trying to redact from these pages from the public view actually needs to be redacted. Remember, the whole purpose of redactions is to make sure any private personal information is not in there, to protect minors that were potentially involved with Epstein back then. That is the purpose for these redactions that has been instructed not only, of course, by Democrats, but by Republicans who are leading this investigation in the committee. So we'll see what they see later this week, if that matches up with what they're expected to see today. And then there's also the question of, will they release these to the public? We know the committee already released about 30,000 pages of documents handed over by the DOJ. They expect to release this stuff too. We just don't know when.
So, Temadayo, what are you going to be watching for with this new evidence from the Epstein estate? What could be potentially most illuminating?
Well, I think it really depends what you're looking for. I want to draw a distinction between a congressional investigation and a DOJ investigation, right? DOJ investigation is focused on finding out crimes, and there's long-standing DOJ policy that you don't release that information unless it results in a criminal charge. Here, we're dealing with a congressional investigation, wider in scope, really a lot more unrestrained, and it's not about finding offenses. So that's where concerns about hearsay or undeveloped claims or just connections can be used for political purposes. So for what I've been looking for, I think first is what's redacted, and does it stay about just protecting private information, Or is it about minors? Or is it really about protecting names of individuals that have political connections there? And in DOJ, it's a lot more expansive to protect people. Right here, we have those restraints really taken off, and I'd be concerned because those individuals cannot defend themselves in any kind of forum because there's no court of law by which they can answer these accusations.
To that point, Ken, we know the DOJ is now arguing that the identities of two individuals who received large sums of money from Epstein back in 2018 should remain secret. What's behind all of this? What do we know about these payments?
Yeah, this is quite interesting, Anna. Citing privacy concerns, the Justice Department has asked a federal judge to deny a request from our NBC News colleague Tom Winter to unseal the names of two associates who received large payments from Epstein in 2018. These people were referred to in court documents as potential co-conspirators. Court records show that one associate received a payment of $100,000 from Epstein, and the second received a payment of $250,000. This was in 2018, days after the Miami Herald began publishing a series of investigative stories shedding light on what victims considered a sweetheart plea deal that Epstein received in Florida in 2008. Now, as part of that plea agreement, Epstein secured a statement from federal prosecutors in Florida that the two individuals we're talking about here would not be prosecuted. One of these people was said to be an Epstein employee. Prosecutors said the payments may be evidence of efforts to influence witnesses. Of course, Anna, this is exactly the kind of information that victims and many members of Congress believe should be made public.
Temadayo, they were protected from prosecution. They were paid six figures by Epstein. The DOJ now saying we got to keep their identities under wraps to protect their privacy. What do you make of that argument, given the situation we all find ourselves in?
Well, there's a long history of that. They were not charged. If DOJ at the time believed they had evidence of their crimes, they could have been charged, they could have been arrested, brought into a court of law, given a form to defend themselves. Now they don't have that. So if there's a decision to release those names, we should consider the implications in a lot of cases. A lot of people are investigated for crimes all the time, and prosecutors exercise discretion not to move forward. Down the road, if the government says we're going to unseal that information for political purposes because it's expedient in that nature, that opens up a kind of Pandora's box. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but the implications that are bigger than President Trump should be considered.
Julie, we heard Speaker Johnson claim that President Trump was actually an FBI informant during the Epstein case years ago. Republican Congressman Tommy Massey, who's been pushing for answers, reacted to that yesterday. Take a look.
Now, I don't know if the speaker misspoke when he said that Donald Trump was an informant. The lawyers for the victim said that Donald Trump had been helpful in 2009 in their case by giving them information, but being an informant implies some formal connection and ongoing relationship with the FBI. I don't know what that's all about. I think the speaker needs to clarify that. And if it's a hoax, why was Donald Trump an informant to a hoax?
Julie, is there any clarification from the speaker?
There is clarification. Speaker Johnson walked back those comments in a statement from a spokesperson for his office saying, quote, "The speaker is reiterating what the victim's attorney said, which is that Donald Trump, who kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, was the only one more than a decade ago willing to help prosecutors expose Epstein for being a disgusting child predator." They are referring to Brad Edwards, who during that press conference with victims last week in front of the Capitol, he did mention that back then Donald Trump was helpful. He was helpful in phone calls. He was helpful in getting to the bottom of their investigation back then. But even Edwards seemed to kind of walk that back as well. I will tell you also, Anna, this is just very bizarre. I interviewed Nancy Mace in early August where she also made this comment to me, and we had no idea where it was coming from back then. A similar walk back happened with her office. And so when you talk about this, and of course Massey is relevant here because he is pushing for that discharge petition to try and force the speaker's hand in essentially forcing the Department of Justice to release all of these files. He's getting close on that effort. He just needs a couple more Democrats to join in after they win those special elections later this month. Three Republicans joining Massey, including Mays, including Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, 3 women. And so this is just really a bizarre comment from Johnson, but one of many in which he says something on this case and then walks it back as he tries to really walk a tightrope between what Republicans and Democrats here want, what his base wants, and what the administration wants is to have them stop this investigation into these files.
Julie Sirkin, Ken Delaney, and Temadayo Gengo Williams, thank you all for starting